Hello,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Very good to see you.
It's great to see you.
Can you do me a favor? I don't like this question, but introduce yourself as of today, because you might be different tomorrow. But as of today, who are you? What are you? Where are you?
Hmm. As of today, that's a good question. It's a spin. So my name is Arshiya Kherani. I go by Arshi or Arsh for short. I live in Southern California, and after many, many, many career pivots, I have landed as a leadership coach, which I really love. I facilitate a lot of workshops. And in my spare time, I love telling stories and building community and jumping on trampolines.
Yeah, I didn't know about the trampolines. I knew about the stories. I didn't know about the trampolines. Is this like a health thing? Like Tony Robbins jumps on trampolines, Like is that why you do it?
No, gross. No. Which would sound like a real wellness thing. I mean, it is, but it's not. I when I was living in New York, I found this like trampoline and like twerk class on ClassPass, and I like loved it. And then I got like a bunch of my friends into it. It turns out you can like go do fitness like cardio classes on trampolines. And I was like, this is awesome. And then when I moved to California, I happened to find one that's like 5 minutes away from my house. And I go all the time. And it's such a great like stress reliever and super fun because it's like cardio and dance and trampoline and like it's really fun.
Oh,
So I guess,
trampoline and twerk.
yeah, that was the OG
So
one.
good.
Yeah.
Tell me about your love of story. Wait, I have to start. I take that back. I had to start how we always start, which
Okay.
is what is liberation?
Liberation to me is being able to say and stand up for what is right without consequences.
Liberation is being able to say and stand up for what is right without consequences. Okay, I like this. I'm also going to challenge this out the gate.
Mhm.
Who's right? Like there's some like, white supremacists who have the liberation to say and stand up for what is right. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I understand why you're asking the question, but I think those people do have the right, whether or not I agree with that right. And I think that it's that exact same right that people like you and I, who look like you and I, who come from the places that you and I come from, don't actually always have that right. And there are often consequences for standing up for what we believe is right. When often, using the example of the white supremacists, they can stand up for what they believe is right, and there's not really repercussions. And so, in that way, in the framework of this conversation, without thinking about it too much before, I would argue that they are liberated, and that is what makes us people like us on the cusp of liberation right now.
Hmm. How interesting to think of them as liberated. In my sort of dharmic context,
I
they're
know.
so yeah. Like yes, I mean I think they're liberated in the matrix. In in the outside of the matrix, they are not liberated, but in the matrix, they are. What is the dude who can become anything.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean, right? It's just like in the context of this exact conversation framework, it works. But I say that with like I'm wearing a keffiyeh, and like I had a corporate workshop 2 hours ago this morning, and I thought 5 times about if I should wear that keffiyeh. And like I did a workshop for a DEI group at a real estate organization, and I thought about how there's a relationship between a land grab that's happening in Palestine and the fact that this company is building real estate here, like building real estate communities here in the US. And it's like I had a version of my workshop introduction where I talked about that, and then I had a version where I didn't, right? And like that is for me where I'm really coming from in this question of like, there are sometimes repercussions or consequences that we have to really think about in our quest for liberation, and like where we're like what is the risk we're going to take to get there. And so for me, even this morning, like I actually didn't take the route of saying the words I wanted to say, but I took the route of wearing the keffiyeh. And those are the choices I think not everybody in that matrix that you're speaking of has to always think about. And that's what's really top of mind for me, at least in this part of my life, in this today.
Yeah, I always say like bodies of culture are the greatest mathematicians in the world because they're having to do the mathematics of what it means to
Yeah,
move forward, cause trouble, not cause too much trouble,
yeah,
when to do this, when not to do this, et cetera, et cetera.
exactly.
Uh, what would you have said if you could say, if you want to say it now? You don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have said that really it's just I would have posed a question of have you thought about the relationship between building communities for people here while there is a land grab of indigenous land and communities elsewhere? And is that something that's top of mind? And that's really how I would have just framed it because I really would have been curious to see like what an AAPI ERG group thought about something like that. And it really feels like a space where like they're not having those conversations out loud.
Hmm. Who is okay, maybe this leads into story. Is that why you throw events? Well, first tell us about the events you throw. Tell us about your love of story, but is that why we tell stories and create spaces to share stories so that we can say things out loud that we might be thinking or feeling or afraid to say out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I run an organization with a couple of friends called Potluck Stories, and we are LA based, and we're a collective that centers BIPOC experiences and stories in live events. And um, that really does come from my love of stories. I think for me, I was always a storyteller. Like I was just a chatterbox, and people used to call me like chatterbox. And like my preschool teacher used to call me like Arshmobile because I would talk so much. And like I don't know, I'm like a youngest child. I come from like a huge brown family, and like it's just storytelling has just always been there. It's how I learned about my heritage. Like I grew up in the US, but my parents grew up in India. And so it's like, I always I feel like in my head, if I close my eyes, I have pictures of like places and experiences that I've never been to.
Mm,
And that's only because of stories. And as I got older in my like especially in my career, storytelling became this like thing that was like a tactic. And then I landed in marketing. And so everything became about like personal brand and founder story and like brand story. And honestly, I found a lot of joy in that because I thought it was a really cool exercise to like scientifically put together a story. And I learned how to do it. And then when I was kind of um, transitioning out of marketing, I really was at this moment where I was like, well, what does it look like to just tell a story for fun without selling something? And what would it look like if people like, again, I reference you and I, but like people who are people of color who come from communities so rich with stories, what if we learn how to do that thing, like the scientific art of storytelling? And I realized that it's like a skill, and a lot of us like we ramble and we know how to like spit off a lot of facts. But what I realized it is like in the current moment is like a really powerful story can inspire action. And that's, I think, what really moved me to start my storytelling community because I want to give people an opportunity to learn how to effectively tell the stories that are so deep in like a short amount of time and to make people take action. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of my love for stories, but stories are the best. Is the TLDR.
What is this scientific art of story?
Yeah, so there's so many different frameworks that you can use to tell a story, right? So one that I really love is the 3 C's, which is context, conflict, and conclusion, right? So you're taking someone through an arc. So if you think about maybe some of the best stories, like even just really common stories, like the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or anything like that, right? There's like the background of what's happening, there's the tension, which is the conflict, and then like there's the lesson learned, right? That's relatable. Another such framework is the hero's journey, right? So you have the whole, yeah, you're nodding your head because like it's a really common one, right? So every TV show, every episode, everything, every book like there's a hero, right? There's a protagonist, and they're going through a journey, and so they start somewhere, and then they start to face some tension and conflict, and then they move into a world where from where they knew everything or knew a lot of things into an unknown, and then they meet mentors and guides, and they transform, and then they come back into the known world, the world that they know, the world that they knew, but they come back changed and they come back different, right? And so I think that's where it's like a story isn't just something that happened, it's something that was going somewhere and now you realized where it was going. And that's what I mean by the science. And there's so much power in teaching our communities how to harness that power of using the moments that happen into into sharing it as a transformational journey of arriving somewhere.
So question you, so we have these beautiful like contexts. This is how you tell a story, three C's or hero's journey. But you had said something earlier about a story that actually invokes, I don't know, change or action. And have you mastered that? I used to do this project for Upworthy called Empathy Labs, and our
Mhm.
goal was to sort of test in the shortest amount of time, how could you move someone, right? Like, how could you not just get a like, but maybe get a donation, or maybe like, how do you move someone to action? This became quite hard to
Mhm.
quantify, but in your experience, how do you, what inside of the three C's is the thing that moves someone to action?
That's a great question. I think that's where it comes back to like branding and marketing, very honestly, right? Because essentially what you're referencing is a call to action. What is the call to action? What is the conversion moment, right? So when you're talking about that in sales, it's like, what's the moment somebody like goes from window shopping to adding it to cart to like putting in their credit card information? And just a regular story, right? That the moment is like, to your point, like, right, I'm talking about wearing a keffiyeh. What is the point where somebody else goes and wears a keffiyeh to a corporate workshop? Where's the point where somebody, because I post something on Instagram about global liberation, somebody reshares it that might not have, right? And I think the moment that you're talking about is the relatability. And like the moment that the problem is not just your problem, it's our problem. I think that's the moment where things change because, and I think we see that with global narrative, right? Like we're seeing these huge moments of solidarity. My mind, obviously, as you can tell, keeps going back to Palestine, but we're seeing these moments of solidarity because we're seeing populations mobilize and mobilize through narrative. There's a lot of people in the world who didn't know that the Irish people were put through a colonization period, right? Like a lot of people just didn't even know that. And now there's a huge Irish solidarity moment that's actually been in existence for a very long time since their own liberation. But that population is now really vocal. And now a whole lot of other populations are, for example, getting mobilized because they're like, oh, this is not just a people of color problem. This is not just a Muslim world problem. White people who look like me have had this problem and are speaking up about it. Right. And so that's the moment where it's like the relationship, there's the relation of them of a similar problem, or of like this could be my problem too, or it's more of my problem than I thought it was.
I so I get to the honor of whatever sharing my thoughts with people, which is cool, like, and one of my favorite experiences is when you're, I'll be up, I'll go give a talk or something, and someone will come up to me after and say, when you said this thing, man, it like really cracked me open, and I understood, and I'll be like, what did I say? And they'll say something I never said,
Mm.
and because I often think it's not about what we say, but it's how we show up,
Mhm.
and if we're present enough to allow someone else to be present, to be moved, to have their own experience, to meet themselves, then we've done, I'm going to say, our job, but it's not our job. It's just like, I think this is true of having real honest conversations where someone is listening to you, not listening about how to respond properly, but like
Mhm.
actually listening.
Mhm.
uh th- that real real insight can take place. uh
Mhm.
I don't really sort of have an end thought to that, but it does make me think of that. And then around our problem, which I love what you said, like, my problem becomes our problem.
Mhm.
Is it on the, well, first I think of George Floyd, and I think about what a really special time,
Mm.
not that that person lost their life, but man, I would go to these protests, and I probably felt safer and more like connected to people than I really do on a regular basis. Like
Yeah.
we fell in love as a society with community, with our other, with understanding of
Mm.
basic human rights. And then unfortunately when the world came back, and we had sort of rent to pay, and jobs to do, and we had to go out with our friends at night, and go to dinner and make reservations, like we kind of forgot people and
Yeah.
became more involved in the game of the Matrix. Uh,
Mhm.
the other thing our makes me think of, right? Our problem, is it the Dalai Lama's? I could be butchering this, so don't be mad if this is wrong. I think the Dalai Lama's tombstone says, "Think about the poorest person you know and ask yourself if your action is serving them."
Mm. Wow,
Uh,
it's beautiful.
and how difficult that is.
Mhm.
Like, and it's my constant fight with social media.
Yeah, I was
Like,
just gonna say, like, scrolling, who is that serving? I don't know.
scrolling or even sharing, like, does it serve? And then I have arguments. I've had, not arguments, but healthy conversations where people have said it serves. The littlest form of action is good.
Yeah,
It serves to even share, if that's all you can do. Not everyone can write a book, or run off to Gaza, or be an aid distributor. Like, that's not everyone's fight, or not everyone can protest every day.
yeah,
um but that idea of understanding the other, I think that's what liberation is, really, is when you're
yeah,
less me, 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 more us, us, us. uh and how difficult that is. I mean, people spend their whole life trying to nurture that quality
yeah.
of disappearing in order to become, and maybe stories can be that.
Yeah, I think, you know, it building off of the moment that you shared of people often having an aha moment around something that you said and how it made them feel versus like the actual word, right? What they're communicating to you is like what their aha moment it was as a result of what you said, right? And so what you said as you're saying right now, like it matters less, right? And something we always say at Public Stories is that you're not here to judge the story. You're here to receive the story. And I think that that is so powerful. And I think that's where I think for me, that shift from being like a brand storyteller to being just a life storyteller has really shifted of like your whole call to action is to just receive because stories stay within us. You hear them and then the feelings that you have from a story, they stay with you even if you cannot recall the details of like what color was this guy that day or what street did this happen on? Like that's not the point, right? And so I think like, to just build off of your point is like that's what resonates with people, you know. Um yeah, and then the action part, I think I think I've been thinking a lot about this and I don't have it completely cracked, but to your point of like sharing something or, I scroll a lot on social media and I share and sometimes I make content and et cetera, et cetera. But I think especially over the last couple of years and like since post pandemic, right? I think the call to action is to just like be in community, right? Be with others because how can you be less me, me, me without being in the presence of others? And like I think we've really seen it, right? Like we've seen the rise of in person events and in person communities like double, triple, right? Like it's people are actively looking for third places. They're actively looking for meetup groups. Like, and I think we all kind of had this realization during the pandemic is like, ironically, like work is not the place that you need to be with people. You can do all your work, most work, right, can be done remotely. You and I are both like in the LA area and we are not sitting in the same room. And while it would be lovely to see you in person, right, as a 3D person, our work is actually not that much different, right? But everything else is different, right? Like when we do our storytelling events, we'll tell our audience, like, if something resonates with you, like, go like snap your fingers or nod or make a sound. Like this is an interactive and live space. And those things, those cues are not replaceable. And that's what builds bonds. And so when you're there and you're like, when you're out there in the regular world and you're like, oh, I'm going to vote in this way, you're going to think about somebody who it might be affected by that much more easily than if you're just on a screen with them.
All right, so you keep talking about the potluck events. Can you just tell people how they go, what it is, how
Yeah.
they make them? Yeah.
Yes. Our community is called Potluck Stories, and it's just potluckstories.com. And we do monthly events in the LA area. We actually just solidified a collaboration with Studious Co-working where we're going to be for the rest of the year, which is really cool. They're an Appy-owned co-working space and third space. And the goal of our events is to be really interactive. And so we do kind of like half of our event is dedicated to like speed friending and getting to know all the other attendees in the room. And then the second half is dedicated to live storytellers telling a story around a prepared theme. And we cap our events at like 25 to 30 people. And so we intentionally keep it like a small kind of like incubator space so that you can actually meet people, and we go get dinner after. And it's like a really like wonderful and like wholesome space that feels like community because people actually come back, and you're not on your own with conversation. And so, I think the ethos of it is really like, and I've, now like in everywhere else in my life, it's made me a much more attentive storyteller, because something we always say is that everyone is a storyteller, because in every conversation you're having, you're telling a story. Like telling someone like, how was work today? Or I got this from Trader Joe's like today, or, anything like that. Like these little moments are stories, and we share them all the time.
You had said earlier, so I want to emphasize these are true stories, right? At these events.
Yes, they're true stories. Yeah.
And I think why I fell in love with true stories when I was like a moth performer and stuff, and the thing that really changed my life was that I think for the first time I understood how difficult it is to judge a true story. Like you
Mm,
can do the worst thing in the world, but if you're honest about it, it's quite profound. You know,
mm,
like you can disagree with it, but it's hard to judge it. Like you can say that sucks or that's hard or that's shitty or, but
mm,
but there's something about the accountability of telling true stories uh, that is that is quite powerful and allows that receiving process that you talked about, which only
mhm.
happens in not only, but is much easier in honesty than it is in art, or in something made up, because you can judge
Exactly.
art. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. You can
you
judge
could
the
art.
writing of something, right? You can like judge like the writing of a show or of a performance, right? But sure, I guess you could judge the delivery of a story, but the story in and of itself isn't really there to be judged. And actually, you said something. I was trying to remember what it was, but I just remembered it. But you said like, right, you're actively listening, and I think that's the other thing is like there's a difference between listening to a story and trying to relate to it and trying to respond to it and trying to just understand with it and sit with it. Right. And those are all like different formats. Right. And so, for example, if you tell someone, okay, we're in LA, like I went to Santa Monica Pier last week and da da da, and there were these cool vendors and da da da. And then if somebody responds to you and it's like, oh, I went to Santa Monica Pier too, but I went 3 weeks ago. And when I went, there was like all this other stuff going on. Then, like, okay, you're just comparing stories, right? It would be so different if you're like, oh, that's so interesting. What kinds of activities did you do at the Santa Monica Pier? Who did you go with? Right. And if you just ask questions, like theoretically, the listener shouldn't even have to say, I've ever been to the Santa Monica Pier. Right. And the idea is that you're centering the storyteller. And I think that's what, to your point, true stories and spaces like this, that platform true stories, give people the opportunity to do, to just be curious and to sit with a feeling as opposed to always feeling that pressure to respond or relate or overshadow.
So there's a cool meditation and exercise I'll share with you, which is I'll share this sort of the meditation exercise part as an individual is when people are speaking, like let's say you're in a car with a bunch of people, and they're
Mhm.
talking. Um, Try not to make each story about you, which is
Mm.
something we do naturally. Like, oh, I once had coffee. You know, like everything sort of comes back to us. Oh, I was
Yeah.
broken up with.
Yeah.
Oh, I have been in love. Oh, I have gone here. Oh, reminds me when we sort of insert ourself into everything. We insert our I-ness into everything, and so the exercise is to just try and listen without inserting your I-ness.
Mm.
um, and I think the way that can work in community or in like active listening exercises is you sort of split two people up, and you do an A and a B, and you say like, A, okay, here's the topic, just sort of speak whatever comes to mind for you, and B, just listen, and you're not allowed to respond. And like, this isn't about responding, it's not even about agreeing, it's just about listening, because you're never going to respond to what these people say, like,
Exactly.
directly.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. That's super interesting. That's super interesting. I've done it in the way we've run our workshops like that sometimes with like same thing. You split into A and B, but the B side can only respond with questions. So you can only ask follow-ups, like if there's a pause or if there's a long pause, like after 5 seconds or something.
yeah,
But I
strengthen
like
that
that too.
curiosity.
Yeah. Never
Yeah,
just
we
not.
just insert me into all of life, and
Yeah.
and I think that's not a bad thing, but it is a thing worth recognizing. Like, I think there's liberation in recognizing that. Recognizing anything and being able to name anything is quite powerful, but we insert meanness, like, into everything, into suffering, into even into Gaza, into genocide, into, like, we have to insert our meanness into it.
Yeah.
um but you're already there without your meanness, like,
Yeah.
you're already a
Well,
part of it.
it's interesting though, right? Like I think I totally understand what you're saying, but just to play devil's advocate for like 1 second, right? Going back to like the relatability, right? Is sometimes I think there's value in creating relatability for people, right? And um, I think, I'm gonna insert my meanness right now, right? So I remember when I first when all this was first happening, it was October. One of my closest friends from college, she was a random roommate of mine, but we got paired together our freshman year of college, and then we were suite mates, and we became really good friends. We were still really good friends, and she's Indian, she's Hindu, and she reached out to me and she was asking me for my perspective on Gaza. I was posting really immediately, like October 7th, October 8th, right? Those first couple of days where it was still a very big minority just posting about Palestine, right? It was something happening over there. It was like there were I stand with Israel flags everywhere, social media tags, etc. And my friend, she reached out to me and she was like, "I want to get your perspective." And from one moment, I was like kind of annoyed because I was like, "It's not my responsibility to educate you. Like, go read a book." But then I really thought about it because I was like, "Well, I'm posting on social media, so like, why am I doing that? Right? I'm doing it to incite action." And this is a great action that she took. She reached out to me, right? And we started talking about it. And we ended up having this series of conversations over the next 2 to 3 months about like my experience as like a Muslim American, as somebody who wears hijab, um, also about how like the genocide happening in Gaza is a green light for genocide in other parts of the world, and it sets precedent, and about how there's a really important election coming up this year in India, and how Muslims in India are being persecuted, and there's increasing ties in politics between India and Israel, and all of these things. And she is like an Indian American, just like me, but she's not Muslim, right? And she just had so many questions. And at the end of it, she was like, not even at the end of it, we're still kind of having these, conversations, which look very different from what they did 6 months ago. But she was like, you've been one of my closest friends, but you're my only Muslim friend, pretty much. And she's like, I've never thought about that connection between like Israeli politics and Indian politics and what that means for Muslims in all of these different locations, right? Or minorities for in all these different locations. And it didn't click for me. And I think it even clicked for her. And I remember her saying like it shouldn't take that, but it did take that. Right. And that's again why we tell stories, because we don't know what someone is going to care about. But all we can do is share our lived experience of something and let them figure out how to care about it. Right. And that's where like the me, me, me-ness is it's important, right? It's important to critically think and build relationships between really big things happening in the world. But I do agree with you that, on smaller moments, maybe that's the differentiation, right? Is like on smaller moments, like how can I center the person? And on bigger moments, how can I center the cause while also making it relatable to people like myself?
Yes, and I think like to return to that Dalai Lama quote, he says, "Think about the poorest person you know." He doesn't say think about the poorest person. Think
Yeah.
about the poorest person you know, and does this action serve them? Because I think he's attempting to say, if it's someone you know, maybe it'll influence you.
Yeah.
But again, I do when I think of liberation, I have to think of like right gods and human drag, and so the human drag version of us is me and finding relatability,
Yeah.
and then when we take off the human drag and we stop the character of me, me, and I do this and I speak to companies or I am a truck driver and and we take
Yeah.
those roles and costumes off,
Yeah.
we remember that like we are not separate from the worst thing or from the best thing.
Yeah.
Uh, like we are both oppressors and oppressed, everyone's in the cage until everyone's free, no one's free.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you when I met you, you were would you call yourself a fashion designer? Um,
Not really. I don't know. An entrepreneur.
an
Not a fashion.
entrepreneur,
Wish I was a
like
fashion.
you had a clothing brand,
Yes.
which
There.
is fashion. Um,
Fair enough.
and so my question to you is, what is the liberation of changing careers and how does that look, and why do we change, and not why do we change careers, like were you forced to, were you inspired to, was it easy for you, was it hard? uh I always say God gave us a steering wheel for a reason.
Mm.
Sometimes we got to turn, sometimes we just got to get out the whip, like, so what is that, what does that feel like, what does that look like, what can you tell others about being multiple things?
Yeah, even when you asked me at the beginning of this conversation, who are you today? I try to think about it through like, well, I do this, I'm not this, and we, I'm somebody who's always really cared so much about my work, and there's always been very blurry lines between my work and my personal life, and it's hard to separate my identity. And I still feel that way a little bit, but yeah. So Chris and I met, I guess it was like coming up close to 10 years ago, maybe not a full 10 years, like
No way.
I've been eight, I don't know, 8 years maybe. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's crazy. And I at that time was I was running my own direct consumer company, which was called Sukoon Active, and we designed activewear for Muslim women. So I wear hijab. I'm a fairly active person, and I just needed activewear for me. Again, going back to that I problem, you problem. Like I needed activewear for myself so that I could join the community of people who have activewear and work out together and all that. And it was incredible. And then we went under during COVID, and so that was like a really tough year. So in 2020, I was really specific or intentional is a better word. I was really intentional about building an ethical and sustainable supply chain. So I built out with the help of a team. It wasn't just me, but with my actual fashion designer, who was like my right hand throughout that whole time. We'd built out a really incredible supply chain. And during COVID, it just like fell apart. And it was a lot of really good lessons learned of diversification and like, I don't know, just really putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will. But yeah, I think to answer your question is that I don't think I've always chosen every pivot. I did choose that pivot. I was working in real estate before that, and then I started this direct to consumer company through like a side project and a Kickstarter campaign. And then in 2020, I just like needed to get a job. It was the summer of the pandemic, no idea how long it was going to last, and I was kind of in a tough spot because I was like far enough along in my career where like I wasn't like a totally like I had like 7, 8 years of work experience, but some of that was entrepreneurial experience. So I ended up moving into a marketing agency and then going into a tech company. So like all these different hats. And I ended up getting laid off last year, and it was like the best thing and the worst thing ever because, I think getting laid off sucks. I mean, it was horrible. It brought up a lot of things that I had to really work on around like my self-confidence. But I think I ended up being in this space of, sorry, I ended up being in this space where I really had to think critically about like, what do I want to do from here on out? And am I gonna just let this thing that happened at me dictate my next steps? Which, I think I really just started thinking about like, what would I do for free if I didn't need to make money? And I was like, I want to help people tell their stories and be able to live into their values and their identity at work. And honestly, like I sat with that for like some months, like 6 months, and I was picking up marketing contracts and doing all these like informational interviews and all this stuff. And I just was like, that sentence just kept feeling really good. And at the end of last year, I just leaned into it, and now that is just what I do. And it's funny because again, like it's really blurry. Like I would do it for free. Like I have to really force myself to like scope it out and value my time because I just love working in these kinds of environments.
So to artists, anyone, but I think artists are, this is a thing we suffer from because we came into something we would do for free. And
Hmm.
then if you got lucky enough to pay your rent from it, to have a career from it,
Exactly.
um, it you lose that love. Not
Yeah.
You don't always lose the love, but it really does evolve. And I think you artists have to remember, oh, I love this thing. Like this thing, is something I would do for free. Uh,
Yes. Absolutely.
so what is that relationship to young entrepreneurs, um, young artists, young self-employed, young creatives?
Yeah.
There is a natural evolution from I would do this for free to, oh, now this is making currency.
Yeah.
What is that dance? If you have any words towards it.
Yeah. I think my that's an excellent question. And it's excellently timed because I think that's the dance I've been doing for the last year of, especially since I came into the startup space, like I started my brand, the first iteration of my brand in 2015. And ever since that time, I'm brown, I have brown skin, I'm South Asian, I wear hijab. Um, for 10 years, literally, I have been somebody who tons of different Muslim or South Asians entrepreneurs are like, oh, she did something. She actually made something. We had some press. We had, we made some waves in the industry. We weren't the biggest brand ever, but we made some waves, and we were part of a dialogue around what it means to have access to an active lifestyle for different communities and communities of color. And I think that was my favorite thing about even having the brand. But what I'm saying is that like I was doing this literally for free. Not even I would do it for free, but it's like I never charged to be a mentor or to like help people set up things on their supply chain or give them advice. And now what that looks like for me, that dance or that kind of route, is that what I do now is I make sure that I am value aligned with any organization or individual that I work with. So I do both one-on-one coaching and I do facilitation. And I think part of the power of working for myself is that I get to set that pricing. And so, for example, I never anticipated having a bunch of nonprofit clients, but half my roster is nonprofit clients. And so I have a lot more of a sliding scale or I work with their budgets. And with corporations, I am a lot less flexible, right? And so that's my ability to be able to be like, well, this is the really important work that I want to see happen from an organizational level. And I can have a sliding scale or a different rate for mission and social impact work than I do for pure capitalistic work, right? And I think that the conversations and the work we're talking about is valuable no matter who you are, right? Um, but it's kind of like if there's any business owners out there, entrepreneurs, it's like the pressure, but also like the fun of being in this role is like you get to make decisions based on your values. And I think that is just so fun. And I haven't, I'll be honest, like over the last 6 months or about a year almost of building out this idea and business, like I have no regrets about making those decisions on the fly and being like, this speaks really highly to my values and I'm going to do it. And this speaks less to my values. And so I'm comfortable charging more to it for it.
Mary Oliver says, this is my final question. I got two more. Mary Oliver says, your actions reveal your devotion. Actions reveal what you are devoted to. So you said value system. So my question to you is, what are you devoted to? Or what are your values? You know?
Mm. My values are, I think, highly rooted in identity. And that's what I love exploring with people is being true to the values that come from your family and your culture that are often forced out of you in mainstream settings. And I that is my goal with my work is to empower and support and help people to just live into the values that are important to them.
Hmm. Are you liberated?
Ish. It's a hard question in this moment, especially. I think I used to think I was liberated. And the last year, I think with everything, not just my personal layoff, but mass layoffs, mass strikes, mass climate change effects, like all these things, I think my perspective around what it means to be liberated has changed a lot. And to close out with what you said, how can we be liberated if we're not all liberated? And I think I carry that sentiment, that feeling so much more deeply with me on a daily basis than I did ever before.
There's two types of Buddhas in Buddhism, and there's the liberated being who chooses to not come back. They sort of escape samsara, and they don't have to do the rebirth thing and the suffering that comes with being born. And then there is the bodhisattva, and the bodhisattva is a liberated being who chooses to be here in order to liberate others. So they choose to keep coming back to this sort of mortal realm, to gods and human drag, in order to bring people along with them. Neither is better than the other, but just sort of two types of liberation: the one who knows we are not free until we're all free, and the one who says, oh, I am free and I don't really have to do this. Neither is right, neither is wrong. Do you have any questions for me? You don't
Ooh,
have
are you? No, I have one. Are you? What? What is your relationship between? What is the relationship between stories and liberation for you?
Oh, stories are, for better or for worse, bound us to our suffering, but they also can help set us free. Everything is a story when you've been made to believe or chosen to believe. And knowing the difference is profound. Or I like to ask, what stories must die so new ones can grow?
Mhm.
We are bound to the story of ourself, to the story of self, to the story of me, to the story of woe, to the story of liberation. Like stories make up the mask and the role in which we play on a daily basis, and we have an opportunity to get free. To get free, to even get free of story.
Mhm.
um to even know that, like, to tell a story is to possibly be bound to it.
Mm,
um
mm,
and that we even get to be free of story and just be here.
mhm.
The first tattoo I have on my body says stories are the only thing worth dying for," which is so
Mm.
aggressive. It's so
Yeah,
aggressive,
it's
and I
pretty
believed it
aggressive
so
for
much.
right now. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I was so young, and I believed it so much. I believed my
Yeah.
job was to go after stories.
Mm.
Um, and I've softened quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, that that life is a thing that's meant to be lived, not necessarily a story to tell. Now we
Mm.
get to tell stories
Mm.
while we're still in this incantation, um, but we get to really live this moment in its fullest. The way we want to listen to other people is the way we want to listen to life, right? The way you want to get curious and ask questions of other people when you're listening to them is the way I want to ask questions of life.
Yeah.
Um, and not dictate the story so much.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that.
yeah.
The lesson I'm still learning, not to be honest, of not dictating the stories and just letting the stories be what they are.
Yeah, they are. They are quite, and we that listening, man, that listening is quite the practice. It's called like Mahamudra in Tibetan Buddhism, and Mahamudra is like what they call the Great Seal. Um, Mahamudra says it's all here. It's all here, but you're so obsessed with like, I want a little more of this and a little less of this. Can I have this but not this? And
Mhm.
until we can let go and just see this, we can't be free.
Yeah.
But we want to control the volume so much. We want to control this and this and this. But Mahamudra says, like, no, this is Mahamudra. Like, it's right here. Everything you asked for,
Yeah.
everything you're curious about, like, it's right here. Just receive it. Seal it in the Great Seal, Mahamudra. Yeah,
Yeah. I like that. I've never heard of that before. I like that. The Great Seal.
it's cool. I think.
Oh, yeah.
Hard work. It's super hard work, but it's worth it. I think we've all experienced liberation in moments, in seconds,
Yeah.
in taste, in like,
Yeah.
but it's enough. It's enough to know it's inside all of us. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in Buddhism, they say the Buddha is inside you, right? Like you are the Buddha, and that's really hard for people to imagine. I like to say liberation is inside you, and you've already tasted it so many times, and now you just have to nourish it. Like, if people work on their jump shot, you can work on your liberation. If people work on their running time, you can work on your
Yeah,
liberation.
t-shirt.
If people, yeah, for real, if people work on their marketing, you can work on your liberation.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you want,
If you
your
you have to
actions
want
reveal
it.
your devotion. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's a
Um,
good callback.
if you want it. Thank you. Anything else?
Thank you. No, thank you so much, Chris. It's a great conversation.
Oh,
And
let the humans know where to. Yeah, you said the potluck website. Say it again.
yes,
Instagram, all the
yes, yes,
things. Yeah.
yes. Yes, you can find me in a bunch of different places. Potluckstories.com is super easy. Kherani.com is also super easy. Um, I am on Instagram. I'm on all the things. So yeah, Chris, I'll send you something, but maybe you could like link it to the notes or something too. But
I'll
yeah,
link all the things. Yeah.
Arshiyakherani.com would be great. I have a weekly newsletter that honestly I really enjoy reading. And so if you have some space in your life, in your inbox, I'd love to connect with you there because I talk about a lot of these kinds of things. Liberation and leadership as it comes to our identity in this world today, both in politics and in business. So yeah, I think that's the one. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Ciao.
Thanks. Bye.